Welcome to the Sleepy Historian. Tonight we journey into the electric world of the late 19th century, when a young Serbian inventor arrived in America with 4 cents in his pocket and a head full of dreams that would light up the world. His name was Nikola Tesla, a man who could see the future in his mind's eye with perfect clarity, who spoke with lightning and captured the power of Niagara Falls. Called a genius and a dreamer, a visionary and a madman, he gave us the modern world, then watched as others claimed the credit. Let us begin. The thunder rolled across the mountains of Smiljan on a July night in 1856, shaking the small Serbian village with the power of nature unleashed. Lightning split the sky in brilliant white branches, illuminating the modest home where Nikola Tesla labored to bring her 4th child into the world. Between the crashes of thunder, a baby's cry joined the symphony of the storm, and Nikola Tesla took his first breath in a world he would transform with electricity. The midwife, an old woman steeped in the superstitions of the mountain villages, crossed herself as lightning struck nearby at the exact moment of the birth. She turned to Nikola with worry in her eyes and whispered that the child would be a child of darkness, born in the heart of the storm. But Nikola, exhausted yet certain, looked at her newborn son and smiled. "No," she said softly. "He will be a child of light." The village of Smiljan lay in a region where the Habsburg Empire met the Ottoman territories, a borderland where different cultures and religions mingled in an uneasy peace. The Tesla family belonged to the Serbian Orthodox community, and Nikola's father, Milutin, served as the local priest. It was a position of respect, but modest means, providing enough for the family to live comfortably, but without luxury in their small parish house. The landscape of Nikola's childhood was one of the dramatic contrasts. Mountains rose against the sky like the walls of ancient fortresses, their peaks often lost in clouds that gathered before the frequent thunderstorms. Rivers carved through limestone valleys, their waters cold and clear, rushing toward the distant Adriatic Sea. In summer, the air was filled with the sound of cicadas and the scent of wild herbs. In winter, snow transformed the world into a realm of silence and crystalline beauty. Young Nikola was the 4th of 5 children, born into a family that valued education and intellectual achievement despite their modest circumstances. His mother, Nikola, possessed a remarkable mechanical aptitude, inventing small household devices and tools that made the work of daily life easier. Though she could not read or write, having never attended school, her hands could create intricate mechanisms, and her mind could solve practical problems with elegant simplicity. From his mother, Nikola inherited a gift for visualization that would become the foundation of his genius. Nikola could look at a problem and see the solution fully formed in her mind, then build it with her hands without the need for drawings or plans. This ability to perceive mechanical relationships in 3 dimensions, to understand how parts would fit together before they were assembled, passed to her son in even more powerful form. His father represented a different kind of influence. Milutin Tesla was a man of words rather than machines, a scholar who wrote poetry and essays, who maintained an extensive library despite the family's limited means, and who expected his children to pursue education with the same dedication he brought to his ecclesiastical duties. He had originally intended Nikola to follow him into the priesthood, a plan that would create tensions as the boy's true interests emerged. Nikola's childhood was marked by experiences that seemed to exist somewhere between the ordinary and the extraordinary. He possessed a sensitivity to sensory input that was almost painful in its intensity. Sounds that others barely noticed would cause him physical discomfort. The sight of pearls made him recoil. The texture of certain fabrics against his skin was unbearable. This heightened sensitivity extended to all his senses, creating a relationship with the physical world that was more vivid, more immediate, and more overwhelming than what most people experienced. He also experienced strange episodes that he would later describe in his writings. Flashes of light would appear before his eyes, blinding him momentarily, and often accompanied by visions of objects and scenes that seemed more real than reality itself. These visions were not dreams or fantasies that he could control, but intrusive images that appeared unbidden and demanded his attention. Sometimes they showed him places he had never been, machines that had never been built, concepts that had no name. The young boy learned to navigate a world that seemed almost hostile in its intensity. Loud noises could trigger these episodes of vision and light. Strong emotions, whether his own or those of people around him, would set off reactions that left him exhausted. He developed strategies to manage these overwhelming sensory experiences, seeking quiet places where he could think without distraction, learning to focus his remarkable mind on problems and puzzles that provided refuge from the chaos of sensation. Books became his sanctuary. In his father's library, surrounded by volumes on history, science, and philosophy, Nikola found a world that he could control through the power of his imagination. He read voraciously, absorbing knowledge with a hunger that seemed insatiable. Mathematics, physics, languages, literature all fell before his remarkable capacity for learning. By his teenage years, he had mastered several languages and could perform complex calculations in his head with a speed that amazed his teachers. But it was electricity that captured his imagination most completely. The lightning storms that were so common in the mountains of his homeland became objects of fascination rather than fear. He would stand at the window during thunderstorms, watching the play of electrical fire across the sky, trying to understand the forces that could split the darkness with such power and beauty. In the crackling energy of the storm, he sensed something fundamental about the nature of reality itself. His first experiments with electricity were simple, crude affairs, conducted with whatever materials he could scavenge or improvise. He built batteries from household materials, created small motors from wire and magnets, constructed devices whose purpose was more to satisfy his curiosity than to accomplish any practical goal. These early efforts were marked by an intuitive understanding of electrical principles that seemed to come from nowhere, as if he had been born knowing truths that others had to learn through years of study. The defining moment of his childhood came when he was 5 years old, watching his older brother Dane work with one of the family's horses. Dane was 7 years older than Nikola, athletic and confident, everything that the sickly younger boy was not. The exact circumstances of what happened next have been lost to time and the imperfect memory of a traumatized child, but the result was clear. Dane fell, was kicked by the horse, and died from his injuries. The death of his brother cast a shadow over the Tesla household that never fully lifted. Milutin and Juka, devastated by the loss of their firstborn son, turned their hopes and expectations toward Nikola with an intensity that the boy found almost crushing. He carried the guilt of the survivor, the irrational but powerful feeling that he should have been the one to die instead of his beloved brother. This guilt would drive him throughout his life, fueling an obsession with achievement that bordered on self-destruction. School in the nearby town offered challenges that Nikola met with an ease that was almost disturbing to his teachers. He could solve complex mathematical problems in his head faster than his classmates could write them down. He memorized entire books after a single reading. Languages came to him as naturally as breathing. Yet despite these gifts, he struggled to fit in with other children, his sensory sensitivities and strange visions marking him as different in ways that made social interaction difficult and often painful. His teenage years were marked by serious illness, a bout with cholera that nearly killed him and left him bedridden for months. During this period of physical weakness, his mind only grew stronger. Lying in bed, unable to move, he exercised his gift for visualization by constructing elaborate machines in his imagination, testing them, refining them, building entire worlds of invention that existed only in his mind. This period of enforced idleness became a training ground for the mental discipline that would define his later work. When he recovered, Nikola returned to his studies with renewed intensity, but also with a growing determination to pursue engineering rather than the priesthood that his father had planned for him. The conflict between father and son over Nikola's future created tensions that were resolved only when Milutin finally accepted that his son's gifts lay in the realm of machines and electricity, rather than scripture and theology. The young man who prepared to leave the mountains of Smiljan for higher education was still struggling to understand and control the visions that had haunted him since childhood. The flashes of light persisted, accompanied now by images of machines that seemed to come from some future world. He had learned to use these visions, to examine the machines his mind created, to test them mentally and refine them until they were perfect. This ability to see and manipulate objects in his imagination with perfect clarity would become the foundation of his greatest inventions. As he packed his few belongings and prepared for the journey that would take him to the Austrian Polytechnic in Graz, Nikola Tesla could not have known that he was beginning a path that would lead him across oceans and into the halls of history. The child of the lightning storm, the boy who could see the future in his mind, was about to step onto a stage where his visions would become reality. The years of education in Graz and Prague filled Tesla's mind with the formal knowledge of physics, mathematics, and engineering that gave structure to his natural intuition. He excelled in his studies, impressing his professors with his ability to solve complex problems mentally and his deep understanding of electrical principles. Yet he also frustrated them with his argumentative nature and his insistence that the accepted methods of designing electric motors were fundamentally flawed. The conflict came to a head during a demonstration of a grammar dynamo, a direct current machine that could function either as a generator or a motor. Tesla's professor was showing how the device worked, explaining the role of the commutator and brushes that transferred electrical current to the rotating armature. Tesla, watching the sparking and inefficiency of these mechanical contacts, stood up and declared that such a system was wasteful and primitive, that there must be a way to create rotation without any sliding contacts at all. His professor responded with the certainty of established knowledge, telling Tesla that what he imagined was impossible. The young student's idea of using alternating current to produce rotation contradicted fundamental principles. Alternating current, by its very nature of reversing direction many times per second, could not produce continuous rotation in a single direction. The problem had been examined by the greatest minds in electrical engineering, and the conclusion was unanimous. Direct current with mechanical commutation was the only practical solution. But Tesla could not accept this verdict. Something in his intuition told him that there was an answer, that the rotating magnetic field he could almost visualize must be possible. The problem became an obsession that followed him after graduation as he searched for employment and tried to establish himself in the world of practical engineering. He thought about it constantly, turning the problem over in his mind, seeking the insight that would reveal the solution. His first positions after university took him to Budapest, where he found work with the Central Telegraph Office. The job was modest, but provided income while he continued to wrestle with the problem of alternating current motors. By 1882, he was 26 years old, still unmarried, and devoted entirely to his work and his theoretical investigations. He lived simply, spending most of his time either at his job or walking the streets of Budapest, lost in thought. During this period, Tesla fell seriously ill with a mysterious condition that left him hypersensitive to all sensory input. Light became painful. Sounds that others barely noticed seemed like thunder in his ears, and his body trembled with nervous exhaustion. Doctors could find no physical cause for his symptoms, which seemed to be some kind of nervous breakdown brought on by years of intellectual strain and poor self-care. For months he was an invalid, unable to work, barely able to function. Yet even in the depths of this illness, his mind remained active, perhaps even more active than before. The forced rest gave him time to think, to visualize, to explore the problem of the rotating magnetic field without the distractions of normal life. His friend Anatol Szigeti, concerned about Tesla's condition, encouraged him to take walks when he felt strong enough, believing that gentle exercise and fresh air might aid his recovery. It was during one of these therapeutic walks in February 1882 that the breakthrough came. Tesla and Szigeti were strolling through the city park as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. Tesla was reciting poetry, verses from Goethe's Faust that he had memorized years before. The German words flowed from his lips as his feet carried him along the familiar path. The sun, the retreating sun. The words seemed to resonate with something deep in his consciousness. And then, suddenly, the vision appeared. Not a vague idea or a theoretical possibility, but a complete and perfect image of a rotating magnetic field created by alternating currents out of phase with each other. Tesla saw it with absolute clarity, as if it had always existed, and he was simply discovering it. Multiple alternating currents, each reaching its peak at a different moment, flowing through coils arranged in a circle. The magnetic fields they produced would add together, creating a single field that rotated smoothly and continuously, pulling a metal rotor along with it. Tesla stopped walking, frozen in place by the power of the vision. His eyes saw not the park around him, but the spinning magnetic field, the elegant dance of electromagnetic forces that made his motor possible. The solution was so simple, so obvious once seen, yet it had eluded every engineer who had considered the problem. Two-phase or three-phase alternating current, with the phases offset in time, would create a rotating field without any moving parts in the electrical circuit itself. Sigeti, alarmed by his friend's sudden stillness and the strange intensity of his expression, asked if something was wrong. But Tesla barely heard him. His mind was racing through the implications of what he had seen, understanding instantly not just the motor, but an entire system of electrical generation, transmission, and utilization. This was not just a solution to one problem, but a revolution in electrical engineering. With a stick, Tesla began drawing diagrams in the dirt of the path, sketching out the configuration of coils and the relationships between the phase currents. His hands moved with certainty, capturing the vision while it was fresh and complete in his mind. He explained to Sigeti, speaking rapidly in his excitement, that he had solved the problem of the alternating current motor, that he had found the key to a new age of electrical power. In the days and weeks that followed, Tesla refined his vision through the unique mental process that would characterize all his greatest inventions. He needed no laboratory, no physical equipment, no experimental prototypes. Everything could be done in his imagination, where he could visualize the motor in perfect detail, could see it running, could make modifications and test their effects, all without building anything physical. This ability to perfect inventions entirely in his mind was perhaps Tesla's most remarkable gift and most significant difference from other inventors. Where Thomas Edison would try thousands of different materials to find the right filament for his light bulb, Tesla could imagine each possibility, test it mentally, and move on to the next without ever picking up a tool. By the time he was ready to build something, he had already proven it would work through countless mental experiments. The motor that existed in Tesla's imagination was not just theoretically interesting, but practically revolutionary. With polyphase alternating current, motors could operate without brushes or commutators, the parts that wore out and required constant maintenance in direct current machines. The motors would be simpler, more reliable, more efficient. But more importantly, the entire system of electrical power would be transformed. Alternating current could be transmitted over long distances with minimal losses, something impossible with direct current. Transformers could easily step voltage up for transmission and down for use. Power stations could be located at natural sources of energy, like waterfalls, far from the cities they served. The whole infrastructure of electrical civilization could be reimagined around this one elegant principle of the rotating magnetic field. Tesla understood all of this in a flash of insight that February afternoon in Budapest. The vision he had been seeking for years had arrived complete and perfect, requiring only the time and resources to bring it into physical reality. Yet he also understood that convincing others of what he had discovered would be more difficult than to discovering it. the electrical engineering establishment was committed to direct current systems, and his revolutionary ideas would face skepticism and resistance from those with investments in the existing technology. For now, he kept his discovery largely to himself, discussing it with Sigeti and a few trusted friends, but making no public announcements. He needed to find a position where he could build prototypes and demonstrate his motors to people with the resources to develop them commercially. The path that would lead him to America and to conflict with Thomas Edison was beginning to take shape, though Tesla could not yet see where his vision would ultimately lead. The mental exercises he performed to perfect his rotating field motor strengthened his already remarkable powers of visualization. He could now hold in his mind a complete working machine, could observe it running for hours or days, could identify flaws and make corrections, all without any physical construction. This ability would serve him well in the challenges ahead, allowing him to develop inventions at a speed that would seem almost superhuman to those who worked through conventional trial and error methods. As his health gradually improved and he returned to work, Tesla began looking for opportunities to move to Paris, where the Continental Edison Company was installing electrical systems throughout Europe. Working for Edison's company would provide technical experience and connections that might eventually help him bring his alternating current system to reality. The irony of working for the man who would become his greatest rival was not yet apparent to the young inventor, with his head full of rotating fields and revolutionary dreams. Paris in 1882 welcomed Tesla with the cosmopolitan excitement of a city at the center of European culture and commerce. The Continental Edison Company had established operations there to bring Thomas Edison's direct current electrical systems to France and other European markets. For Tesla, the position offered an opportunity to work with the most advanced electrical technology of the time, even if that technology was based on principles he believed were fundamentally limited. The work itself was often routine, involving the installation and repair of Edison's lighting and power systems in buildings throughout Paris and other French cities. Tesla approached these assignments with characteristic thoroughness, but his mind was always partly occupied with his own alternating current system. In his spare time, he worked on refining his vision of polyphase motors and generators, preparing drawings and calculations that he hoped would eventually convince someone to fund their construction. His exceptional abilities did not go unnoticed by his supervisors at the Continental Edison Company. Tesla could diagnose and repair electrical problems faster than more experienced engineers, and his innovations often improved the performance of Edison's equipment. He quickly gained a reputation as one of the most capable men in the organization, someone who could be sent to handle the most difficult technical challenges. This reputation led to his being dispatched to Strasbourg in 1883 to solve problems with a lighting installation at a new railroad station. The system had been poorly designed and was malfunctioning in ways that embarrassed the company and threatened to damage Edison's reputation in Germany. Tesla traveled to Strasbourg and quickly identified and corrected the problems. But more importantly, he used his time there to build the first physical prototype of his alternating current motor. Working in a machine shop when he was not solving the railroad station's electrical problems, Tesla constructed a simple motor based on his Budapest vision. The device was crude compared to what he had perfected in his imagination. But it worked. The rotor spun smoothly without brushes or commutators, driven by the rotating magnetic field created by two-phase alternating current. For the first time, Tesla had physical proof that his vision could be realized, that the rotating field principle was not just theoretical, but practical. He demonstrated the motor to several officials and businessmen in Strasbourg, hoping to find someone who would invest in developing the technology commercially. But despite the impressive demonstration, no one was willing to provide funding. The electrical industry was committed to direct current, and Edison's growing commercial success made investors reluctant to support competing systems. Tesla returned to Paris disappointed, but not defeated, carrying his prototype and his unshakable belief in his alternating current system. The managers at the Continental Edison Company recognized Tesla's value and wanted to keep him in their organization, but they also understood that his ambitions extended beyond the routine work available in Paris. Charles Batchelor, who oversaw the company's European operations and had become something of a mentor to Tesla, suggested that the young inventor might find greater opportunities in America. Working directly for Thomas Edison in New York might provide the platform Tesla needed to develop his ideas. Batchelor wrote a letter of introduction that has become legendary in the history of technology. The exact wording is disputed, but according to Tesla's later recollections, the letter said something like, "I know two great men, and you are one of them." The other is this young man. Whether Batchelor actually used these exact words, or whether Tesla's memory embellished them over the years, the letter clearly conveyed that someone extraordinary was being sent to Edison's attention. In June 1884, Tesla boarded a ship bound for New York, carrying Batchelor's letter, a few technical articles he had written, some drawings of his alternating current system, and very little else. The voyage across the Atlantic was marked by misfortune that seemed almost comically bad. His luggage, containing most of his possessions and important papers, was stolen. His money disappeared. Whether through theft or his own carelessness, he was never entirely sure. A near mutiny aboard the ship created chaos and fear among the passengers. When Tesla finally arrived in New York Harbor in early July, watching the Statue of Liberty emerge from the morning mist, he had exactly 4 cents in his pocket. This detail, which he would repeat often in later years, symbolized both the desperate nature of his circumstances and the enormous faith he had in his own abilities. He was 28 years old, alone in a foreign country whose language he spoke imperfectly, with no resources except his genius and his vision of alternating current. The city that greeted him was overwhelming in its scale and energy. New York in 1884 was a metropolis of nearly 2 million people, growing rapidly as immigrants poured in from Europe and rural Americans sought opportunity in the urban economy. The streets were crowded with horse-drawn carriages and the new electric streetcars, elevated trains, and the beginnings of what would become the subway system. Buildings were growing taller, approaching 10 stories in some cases, made possible by the development of steel frame construction and elevators. Electricity was just beginning to transform the city. Edison's Pearl Street station, which had begun operating 2 years earlier, provided direct current power to a small district in Lower Manhattan. The sight of electric streetlights replacing gas lamps was still novel enough to draw crowds of observers. But the system's limited range meant that only a fraction of the city could be reached by Edison's network. Tesla, walking through the streets toward Edison's offices, could see both the promise and the limitations of electrical technology. He made his way to Edison's headquarters at 65 Fifth Avenue, presenting himself and bachelor's letter to the office staff. Edison, who worked notoriously long hours and expected the same of his employees, was in the building despite the late afternoon hour. When told that a European engineer had arrived with a strong recommendation from Batchelor, Edison agreed to meet him, curious about anyone whom his Paris manager considered exceptional. The meeting between these two giants of electrical engineering was brief and somewhat cool. Edison was 40 years old, already famous as the inventor of the phonograph and the practical incandescent light bulb at the height of his powers and confidence. He had built a successful business based on direct current electricity and had little patience for theories that questioned his approach. Tesla was young, unknown, foreign, and advocating for an alternative system that Edison had already dismissed as impractical. Yet Edison recognized capability when he saw it, and Batchelor's recommendation carried weight. He offered Tesla a position at Edison Machine Works, the manufacturing facility where his generators and other electrical equipment were built. The salary was modest, $18 per week, but the work would provide experience with American electrical technology and possibly opportunities to demonstrate his own abilities. Tesla accepted, beginning a relationship that would prove both valuable and ultimately destructive. For the moment, he needed income and the chance to learn more about American industry and finance. His alternating current system would have to wait while he established himself in this new country. But in his mind, the rotating field continued spinning, perfect and complete, waiting for its moment to transform the world. The Edison Machine Works on Girk Street in New York operated day and night, producing the dynamos, lamps, and other electrical equipment for Edison's expanding direct current empire. Tesla reported for work shortly after his arrival in America, entering a world of practical manufacturing that was far removed from the theoretical elegance he had cultivated in Europe. Here, the emphasis was on production, on solving immediate problems, on making equipment that worked reliably enough to sell profitably. Edison's management style reflected his own personality and work habits. He was a fierce believer in long hours and direct experimentation, often working through the night and sleeping briefly at his desk before resuming work. He expected his engineers to show similar dedication, and those who could not keep pace found themselves dismissed. The atmosphere was competitive and intense, driven by Edison's determination to dominate the electrical industry before competitors could establish themselves. Tesla adapted to this environment with difficulty. His methodical approach, based on mathematical analysis and mental visualization, seemed strange to Edison and his other engineers, who were accustomed to building and testing numerous physical prototypes. Edison would later say that Tesla was good with theory but impractical, that he thought too much and built too little. Tesla, for his part, found Edison's trial-and-error methods wasteful and primitive, a brute force approach that achieved results through sheer persistence rather than intelligence. Despite these differences in style, Tesla's abilities quickly became apparent. He could solve technical problems that baffled more experienced engineers, often after examining a malfunctioning system for just a few minutes. His understanding of electrical principles allowed him to identify root causes and develop elegant solutions where others saw only mysterious failures. This talent made him valuable to Edison, who began assigning him increasingly difficult challenges. The generators that powered Edison's direct current system were temperamental machines that required constant maintenance and often failed at inopportune moments. They were inefficient, converting only about 60% of the mechanical energy input into electrical output, with the rest wasted as heat. Edison recognized that improving these generators would reduce costs and increase the profitability of his electrical systems. But his own engineers had been unable to make significant improvements. Edison called Tesla into his office one day and presented him with this challenge. If Tesla could redesign the generators to improve their efficiency and reliability substantially, Edison said he would pay him $50,000. This was an enormous sum, more than most engineers would earn in a lifetime of work, enough to provide complete financial security. For Tesla, who was living in near poverty, the promise represented the chance to fund his own alternating current experiments once the generator work was complete. Tesla threw himself into the project with total commitment. For nearly a year, he worked almost continuously on redesigning Edison's dynamos, often putting in 18 to 20-hour days. He developed 24 different types of standard machines to replace Edison's 2 basic designs, each optimized for specific applications and voltages. The improvements were dramatic, increasing efficiency to over 90% and greatly reducing maintenance requirements. The technical achievement was remarkable, representing a fundamental redesign of Edison's core equipment based on sound electrical engineering principles. Tesla's generators were not only more efficient, but more reliable, simpler to maintain, and better suited to the demands of commercial power generation. The improvements would save Edison's company substantial sums in manufacturing costs and field repairs, while also making the direct current system more competitive against emerging alternatives. When Tesla completed the work, he went to Edison to collect the promised payment of $50,000. Edison's response has become one of the most infamous moments in the history of invention. He laughed and told Tesla that the promise had been a joke, an example of American humor that the immigrant had failed to understand. There would be no $50,000. Instead, Edison offered to raise Tesla's salary from $18 to $28 per week. The betrayal was devastating, not primarily because of the money, though that was certainly significant, but because of what it revealed about Edison's character and methods. Tesla had trusted Edison's word, had worked himself nearly to exhaustion for months based on that trust, and had been repaid with mockery. The realization that he had been exploited, that his genius had been used to enrich Edison, while he remained in poverty, created a bitterness that never fully healed. Tesla resigned immediately, walking away from Edison Machine Works without looking back. The break between these two men was complete and permanent. Edison would later claim that Tesla was impractical and difficult to work with, while Tesla would describe Edison as a crude empiricist who achieved results through brute force rather than intelligence. The personal animosity would soon be amplified by commercial competition as they became leaders of opposing systems in the coming war of currents. The months following Tesla's resignation were perhaps the darkest period of his life. Without income or prospects, he found himself doing manual labor to survive. He worked as a ditch digger, helping to install the underground electrical conduits for the very systems he knew he could improve beyond measure. The work was physically exhausting and spiritually crushing for a man of his abilities and ambitions. His fellow laborers thought him odd, this tall, thin man who spoke with an accent and sometimes drew strange diagrams during lunch breaks. He would sketch out designs for his alternating current motors in the dirt, working through refinements and improvements while sitting beside the ditches he had been digging. The contrast between what he was capable of and what he was forced to do created a despair that came close to destroying him. Years later, Tesla would describe this period as one of terrible suffering. When he questioned whether his visions would ever be realized, or whether he would die with his greatest inventions trapped forever in his imagination. The injustice of his situation was maddening. He possessed knowledge that could revolutionize electrical power, yet he was reduced to swinging a pickaxe for day wages, while Edison grew wealthy from the generator improvements Tesla had given him. Yet even in this darkness, Tesla never abandoned his vision. He continued to refine his alternating current system mentally, holding it complete and perfect in his mind, waiting for the opportunity to bring it into reality. The motors and generators that had existed for years only in his imagination remained as clear and detailed as ever, ready to be built when circumstances finally allowed. The salvation that Tesla desperately needed came through an unexpected connection. A foreman at one of the construction sites where Tesla was working, impressed by the obvious education and intelligence of this strange ditch digger, mentioned him to some acquaintances who were looking for new technologies to invest in. These men, including Alfred S. Brown and Charles F. Peck, were experienced businessmen who understood that the electrical industry was still in its early stages and that new technologies might yield substantial profits. Brown and Peck agreed to meet with Tesla, curious about the alternating current system he described with such conviction. The meeting took place in early 1887, and Tesla's presentation was persuasive. He explained the principle of the rotating magnetic field, described how polyphase alternating current could be transmitted efficiently over long distances, outlined the advantages of his brushless motors over Edison's direct current machines. But more than the technical details, what convinced the investors was Tesla's absolute certainty, his unshakable confidence that what he described was not theory but practical reality. With funding from Brown and Peck, the Tesla Electric Company was incorporated in April 1887. For the first time since arriving in America, Tesla had the resources to transform his mental inventions into physical reality. He established a laboratory on Liberty Street in Manhattan, a modest but adequate space where he could finally build the motors and generators that had existed for so long only in his imagination. The construction of Tesla's first American alternating current motors proceeded with remarkable speed. Because every detail had been perfected mentally over years of visualization, there was no need for trial and error. Tesla knew exactly what dimensions each component needed, exactly how the windings should be arranged, exactly what materials to use. His assistants simply followed his precise instructions, building machines that worked perfectly from the moment they were first tested. The demonstrations of these motors created immediate excitement among those who witnessed them. Here were machines that started smoothly, ran quietly, required no brushes or commutators, and operated with efficiency far exceeding any direct current motor. The rotating magnetic field was no longer just an idea, but a physical reality spinning before the eyes of engineers and investors who could now see what Tesla had been describing. Tesla filed his fundamental patents on the alternating current polyphase system in late 1887 and early 1888. These patents would prove to be among the most valuable in the history of technology, covering not just specific motor designs, but the entire principle of using multiple alternating currents out of phase with each other to create rotating magnetic fields. Anyone who wanted to build practical alternating current motors would need to license Tesla's patents or develop alternative designs that somehow avoided the principles he had captured in his claims. In May 1888, Tesla was invited to lecture at the American Institute of Electrical Engineers, presenting his polyphase system to the most important electrical engineers in America. The lecture, delivered at Columbia College, was a triumph. Tesla brought working models of his motors, demonstrated their operation, and explained the principles that made them possible. The response from the audience was enthusiastic, with many engineers immediately recognizing the revolutionary potential of what Tesla had achieved. Word of Tesla's lecture spread quickly through the electrical engineering community. Among those who took notice was George Westinghouse, the successful industrialist who had made a fortune in railroad air brakes and was looking for opportunities in the electrical field. Westinghouse immediately recognized that Tesla's alternating current system was superior to Edison's direct current in almost every important way, and he moved quickly to acquire the rights to commercialize it. The stage was set for Tesla's vindication and Edison's downfall, for the war of currents that would determine the future of electrical power. The ditch digger of 1886 was about to become one of the most important figures in technological history, and the man who had betrayed him was about to face the consequences of having dismissed alternating current as impractical. The vision born in Budapest and perfected in poverty was finally ready to change the world. George Westinghouse arrived at Tesla's Liberty Street laboratory in July 1888, a solid man in his early 40s with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to success. He had built his first fortune on the air brake system that made railroad travel safer and more efficient, and he was now determined to apply the same combination of technical insight and business acumen to the emerging electrical industry. The moment he saw Tesla's motors spinning smoothly without sparking brushes, he understood that he was looking at the future. The meeting between Tesla and Westinghouse was cordial and productive from the start. Unlike Edison, who had dismissed Tesla's ideas without serious consideration, Westinghouse immediately grasped the significance of the polyphase system. He understood that alternating current's ability to be transmitted over long distances wasn't just a technical curiosity, but a revolutionary advantage that could transform the entire electrical industry. More importantly, he had the financial resources and business organization to bring Tesla's invention to market on a scale that the inventor could never achieve alone. The negotiations moved quickly, driven by Westinghouse's recognition that time was of the essence. Edison's direct current system was becoming entrenched as the standard for electrical power, and challenging that dominance would require aggressive action. Westinghouse needed Tesla's patents to build a competitive alternating current system, and Tesla needed Westinghouse's resources to see his vision realized. Their interests aligned perfectly. The agreement they reached was remarkably generous to Tesla, reflecting both Westinghouse's assessment of the patent's value and his genuine respect for the inventor's genius. Westinghouse agreed to pay $60,000 in cash for the patents, plus royalties of $2.50 for every horsepower of electrical equipment sold using Tesla's system. If alternating current succeeded, as both men believed it would, those royalty payments could eventually make Tesla one of the wealthiest men in America. For Tesla, the Westinghouse agreement represented vindication after years of struggle and poverty. His alternating current system, conceived in a vision during a walk in Budapest 6 years earlier, perfected through countless hours of mental refinement, would now be manufactured and distributed by one of America's most successful industrialists. The dream that had sustained him through Edison's betrayal and the months of ditch digging was finally becoming reality. Westinghouse immediately put his organization to work manufacturing equipment based on Tesla's designs. Factories in Pittsburgh began producing polyphase generators and motors, while Westinghouse's engineers worked to adapt the system for commercial installation. The early installations demonstrated the superiority of alternating current convincingly. Where Edison's direct current required generating stations every few miles, Westinghouse's AC system could transmit power from centralized stations to entire regions. But Westinghouse and Tesla were not prepared for the ferocity of Edison's response. The famous inventor, seeing his direct current empire threatened by the superior alternating current technology, launched a public relations campaign designed to terrify Americans about the dangers of Tesla's system. Unable to compete on technical merits, Edison decided to compete on fear, to convince the public that alternating current was a deadly menace that should be banned. The campaign began with Edison's associates spreading stories about accidents involving high-voltage alternating current. Newspapers friendly to Edison published articles warning readers about the dangers of the voltages used in AC transmission. Edison himself began conducting public demonstrations in which animals were electrocuted using alternating current at voltages far higher than would ever be used in practice, all to create an association between Tesla's system and violent death. Dogs, cats, horses, and even an elephant named Topsy were killed in these demonstrations, which Edison conducted at his laboratory in West Orange, New Jersey. The spectacles were gruesome and effective, creating visceral reactions of horror that no amount of technical explanation could overcome. Edison understood something that Tesla did not, that in public debates, emotion often matters more than logic, and fear is more powerful than reason. The darkest aspect of Edison's campaign involved his support for using alternating current in the newly developed electric chair for executions. Edison's reasoning was coldly calculated. If New York State adopted AC for capital punishment, the public would forever associate alternating current with death, making it psychologically impossible for people to accept AC power in their homes. Edison even tried to introduce a new verb, suggesting that execution by electricity should be called being Westinghoused, a direct attack on Tesla's business partner. The first execution by electric chair took place in August 1890 at Auburn Prison in New York. The execution of William Kemmler was botched horribly, taking 8 agonizing minutes as the condemned man's body smoked and burned. Newspapers described the scene in graphic detail, exactly as Edison had hoped, creating public revulsion about alternating current. For months afterward, the electric chair dominated conversations about AC power, associating Tesla's elegant invention with torture and death. Tesla found Edison's campaign deeply painful and frustrating. His vision of alternating current had always been about benefiting humanity, bringing light and power to millions, reducing human drudgery, and improving quality of life. To see his invention associated with death and horror, to watch Edison deliberately mislead the public about the relative safety of AC and DC, created a bitterness toward his former employer that never entirely faded. Yet Tesla refused to respond with similar tactics. Where Edison staged public electrocutions, Tesla gave dignified lectures explaining the actual safety characteristics of properly designed alternating current systems. He pointed out that danger came from voltage and current levels, not from whether electricity was AC or DC. He demonstrated his equipment under controlled conditions, showing that AC could be as safe as any electrical system when properly installed. The technical arguments were on Tesla's side, but Edison's campaign was disturbingly effective in creating public fear. The war of currents, as newspapers began calling the conflict, was being fought as much in public opinion as in technical journals. Westinghouse found himself defending not just a business decision, but a technology that many Americans had been taught to fear. The opportunity to win the war of currents decisively came in 1893, when the organizers of the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago issued a request for proposals to illuminate the fair. The exposition, planned to celebrate the 400th anniversary of Columbus's arrival in the Americas, was conceived as a spectacular showcase of progress and technological achievement. The organizers wanted electrical lighting on an unprecedented scale, creating a white city that would demonstrate the power of electricity to transform night into day. Edison's General Electric Company submitted a bid based on direct current, requiring multiple generating stations throughout the fairgrounds because of DC's limited transmission range. The cost estimate was over $1 million. Westinghouse, using Tesla's alternating current system, could provide the same illumination from centralized generators for less than half that amount. The technical and financial advantages were overwhelming. The fair organizers, facing budget constraints and impressed by the superiority of the Westinghouse proposal, awarded the contract for electrical illumination to Westinghouse Electric. The decision was a devastating public rejection of Edison's technology in favor of Tesla's system. The White City of Chicago would shine with alternating current, providing visible proof to millions of visitors that AC was the future of electrical power. Tesla worked closely with Westinghouse's engineers throughout 1892 and early 1893, designing the lighting system that would illuminate the exposition. More than 200,000 incandescent lamps would be powered by massive polyphase generators based on Tesla's designs. The installation would be the largest electrical system ever created, a proving ground for technology that would soon spread across America and the world. When the exposition opened on May 1st, 1893, the electrical illumination exceeded even the most optimistic expectations. As darkness fell on opening night, the assembled crowds watched in awe as the White City blazed into brilliance. The neoclassical buildings, designed to evoke ancient Athens and Rome, were transformed into structures of pure light. Fountains and lagoons reflected the illumination in shimmering patterns that seemed almost magical. 27 million people visited the fair during its 6-month run, and virtually all of them were impressed by the electrical displays. More importantly, the system operated flawlessly throughout the exposition, demonstrating the reliability and safety of alternating current under the most demanding and public conditions imaginable. The fears that Edison had tried to cultivate seemed absurd in the face of such obvious success. The triumph at Chicago effectively ended the war of currents as a technical debate, though Edison would never publicly admit defeat. It became clear to investors, utilities, and the public that alternating current was superior for power transmission and distribution. Direct current would survive in some specialized applications, but the future belonged to Tesla's polyphase system. The final vindication came with the decision about harnessing Niagara Falls. For decades, engineers had dreamed of capturing the enormous power of the falls for human use, but the challenge of transmitting that power to Buffalo and other distant cities had seemed insurmountable. The Niagara Falls Power Company had been evaluating proposals from engineers around the world, searching for a practical method to develop this immense natural resource. The success at the Chicago Exposition resolved any doubts. In October 1893, the Niagara Commission awarded the contract to Westinghouse Electric, which would use Tesla's polyphase system to generate alternating current at the falls and transmit it 22 miles to Buffalo. The project would be the largest electrical installation in the world, demonstrating conclusively that AC was not just superior to DC, but represented a fundamental advance in electrical engineering. Tesla visited Niagara Falls in 1895 to witness the first generators coming online, massive machines based on his designs, transforming the power of falling water into electrical current. Standing near the falls, feeling the ground tremble with the force of the cascading water, he experienced a satisfaction that went beyond professional pride. This had been his vision, born in a moment of insight in Budapest 13 years earlier, and now it was powering cities and factories across an entire region. Yet even as he celebrated these triumphs, Tesla was already turning his attention to new frontiers. The polyphase power system that had consumed so much of his energy now seemed almost routine, a solved problem that engineers could implement without his direct involvement. His restless mind was moving toward more fundamental questions about electricity and its potential applications, investigations that would lead him into increasingly speculative territory. The royalty payments from Westinghouse that should have made Tesla wealthy were beginning to flow, though not yet in the enormous amounts that the original agreement had promised. But financial security, which had seemed so important during the years of poverty, was already becoming less interesting to Tesla than the pursuit of new visions. His laboratory on Grand Street in Manhattan was becoming a place of increasingly exotic experiments, with high-frequency currents and electromagnetic radiation. The man who had revolutionized electrical power at age 36 was not content to rest on his achievements. The alternating current system had been merely the beginning, the first practical application of insights that went much deeper. Tesla believed he was touching fundamental truths about the nature of electricity and energy, truths that could lead to even more revolutionary technologies. The question was whether the world would follow where his vision led, or whether he was beginning a journey into territory too far ahead of his time. The laboratory on Grand Street, where Tesla moved in 1889, became a place where the boundaries between science and spectacle dissolved in displays of electrical phenomena that seemed more like magic than engineering. Tesla had always been interested in high frequencies, but after the success of his polyphase system, he began investigating this area with increasing intensity. The equipment he developed produced voltages in the millions of volts at frequencies thousands of times higher than the 60 cycles used in power systems. The centerpiece of this research was what became known as the Tesla coil, a resonant transformer that could produce spectacular electrical effects. The device consisted of 2 coils of wire, a primary with a few turns of heavy wire and a secondary with many turns of fine wire, coupled through a magnetic field. By carefully tuning the electrical properties of both coils to the same resonant frequency, Tesla could achieve enormous voltage multiplication, building up electrical potential that could discharge through the air in lightning-like arcs. The demonstrations Tesla conducted with his coils became legendary among those fortunate enough to witness them. He would stand in his laboratory while millions of volts discharged around him, his body glowing with St. Elmo's fire as electrical flames danced across his skin without causing injury. He held wireless light bulbs that glowed brilliantly in his hands, powered by electromagnetic fields rather than wires. He created artificial lightning that illuminated the laboratory with brilliant flashes accompanied by crashes of thunder that could be heard blocks away. These demonstrations were not mere showmanship, though they certainly created spectacle. Tesla was investigating fundamental questions about the behavior of electricity at high frequencies and voltages. He discovered that high-frequency currents behaved very differently from the low-frequency power currents that were his commercial legacy. They flowed along the surface of conductors rather than through their interior. They could pass through the human body without causing the muscular contractions and heart disruption that made low-frequency AC dangerous. Most intriguingly, Tesla observed that high-frequency electromagnetic energy could be transmitted through space without wires and absorbed at distant locations. This observation planted the seed of what would become his obsession for the remainder of his life, the dream of wireless power transmission. He imagined a world where electricity could be broadcast, like light or sound, available anywhere to anyone with appropriate receiving equipment, eliminating the need for the vast networks of wires that were beginning to crisscross the landscape. The visitors who came to witness Tesla's demonstrations included some of the most famous people of the Gilded Age. Mark Twain became a frequent guest at the laboratory, fascinated by the electrical displays and by Tesla himself. The author and the inventor formed an unlikely friendship, with Twain's humor providing relief from Tesla's intense focus on his work. Photographs from this period show Twain standing in Tesla's laboratory, his white suit glowing eerily in the light of high-frequency discharges. Other notable visitors included the actress Sarah Bernhardt, who watched in amazement as Tesla caused phosphorescent tubes to glow without any physical connection to a power source. Rudyard Kipling came to observe the artificial lightning. The pianist Ignacy Paderewski visited and was treated to demonstrations that seemed to defy the laws of physics as understood by most people. These celebrity visitors helped spread Tesla's fame beyond the technical community, transforming him into a public figure known for his electrical wizardry. The publicity was both helpful and harmful. It brought Tesla to the attention of potential investors who might fund his research, but it also contributed to a growing perception of him as more performer than serious scientist. While his polyphase AC system was obviously practical and revolutionary, his high-frequency experiments seemed to some observers like elaborate fireworks, impressive to watch, but without clear practical application. Tesla's personal eccentricities, which had always been present but manageable, began to intensify during this period. His sensitivity to sensory input became more extreme, making social interactions increasingly difficult. He developed elaborate rituals around meals, insisting that the number of napkins, pieces of silverware, and other items follow specific numerical patterns. His fear of germs grew into a near phobia that made shaking hands painful and required him to wash his hands repeatedly throughout the day. He also developed a routine that isolated him from normal human relationships. He worked primarily at night, often until dawn, then slept briefly before rising in the afternoon. He took his meals alone in his rooms at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, ordering the same foods prepared in the same way every day. He never married, claiming that intimate relationships would distract him from his work. His closest companions were the pigeons he began feeding in the parks near his hotel, creatures that demanded nothing from him except food and gave him the uncomplicated affection he found difficult to accept from humans. Yet his scientific work during this period was genuinely important, laying groundwork in areas that others would later develop into practical technologies. His investigations of high-frequency phenomena contributed to the development of radio, diathermy medical treatments, and various forms of electromagnetic communication. The Tesla coil would become a standard piece of equipment in early radio stations and remains important in certain scientific applications today. In 1891, Tesla became an American citizen, a formal recognition of his adopted homeland. The same year, he delivered a landmark lecture to the American Institute of Electrical Engineers, titled Experiments with Alternate Currents of High Potential and High Frequency. The presentation was a masterpiece of scientific demonstration and theatrical performance, showing his oscillators and transformers producing millions of volts and creating effects that astounded the engineering community. He also began investigating what we now call radio waves, the wireless transmission of electromagnetic signals. His work in this area was sophisticated and preceded that of Guglielmo Marconi, the Italian inventor who would receive most of the credit and commercial success for developing radio communication. Tesla filed patents describing the fundamental principles of radio in the early 1890s, including the concepts of tuning transmitters and receivers to specific frequencies. The relationship between Tesla's work and Marconi's later success would become one of the most contentious priority disputes in the history of technology. Tesla's theoretical understanding was deeper, and his patents were filed earlier, but Marconi was more practical in his approach and far more effective at commercializing the technology. When Marconi achieved the first transatlantic wireless transmission in 1901, it was hailed as a breakthrough, despite being based on principles Tesla had described years earlier. For Tesla, these disputes over priority and credit were frustrating, but secondary to his larger vision. He saw radio communication as merely one application of wireless electromagnetic transmission, a stepping stone toward his ultimate goal of broadcasting power itself. While others celebrated Marconi's Morse code signals crossing the Atlantic, Tesla was imagining a world where electricity could be drawn from the air anywhere on the planet, where the vast infrastructure of power lines could be eliminated entirely. In March 1895, disaster struck when fire destroyed Tesla's Grand Street laboratory. The blaze consumed years of experimental equipment, notes, and prototypes, setting back his research significantly. For an inventor who relied on his perfect memory rather than meticulous documentation, the loss was primarily one of time and physical equipment rather than knowledge, but the destruction was still devastating. The fire might have been an opportunity for Tesla to reconsider his direction, to focus on commercially viable projects rather than increasingly speculative investigations. Instead, he rebuilt his laboratory and plunged even deeper into research on wireless transmission. The new laboratory on Houston Street became the site of experiments that would eventually lead him to his most ambitious and ultimately tragic project. Tesla was becoming convinced that wireless power transmission wasn't only possible, but inevitable. He had demonstrated the principle on a small scale, lighting bulbs at a distance without wires, transmitting energy across his laboratory through electromagnetic coupling. The question was whether this could be scaled up to transmit meaningful amounts of power over distances of miles or thousands of miles. Most engineers who examined the question concluded that long-distance wireless power transmission was impractical. The physics of electromagnetic radiation meant that energy would disperse according to the inverse square law, making efficient transmission impossible over large distances. But Tesla believed he had found a way around these limitations by using the Earth itself as part of the transmission system, setting up standing waves that would resonate in the planet's crust and atmosphere. This vision of wireless power would come to dominate Tesla's thinking for the remainder of his productive life. It would lead him to his greatest triumph and his deepest failure, to the construction of a massive experimental facility and to financial ruin, to the edge of vindication and into obscurity. The man who had already revolutionized electrical power was about to stake everything on a dream that was perhaps too far ahead of its time, or perhaps simply impossible. The financial panic of 1893 had devastated the American economy, causing banks to fail and businesses to collapse throughout the nation. The Westinghouse Electric Company, overextended from the costs of fighting Edison and developing the Niagara Project, found itself in serious financial difficulty. The company's bankers delivered an ultimatum: renegotiate the Tesla royalty agreement or face bankruptcy. The payments that had seemed generous when negotiated were now threatening to destroy the company, bringing Tesla's inventions to the world. George Westinghouse came to Tesla's laboratory to discuss the crisis personally, explaining the situation honestly and completely. Without relief from the royalty obligations, the company would be forced into receivership. If that happened, Tesla's patents might survive, but they would likely be controlled by the same financial interests that had supported Edison's direct current empire. The choice was stark. Tesla could insist on his legal rights and watch his technology fall into hostile hands, or he could tear up the royalty agreement and ensure that his system would be developed by men who understood its potential. Tesla made his decision quickly, taking the contract that promised him millions of dollars and tearing it to pieces. He told Westinghouse that their friendship and partnership was worth more than money, that seeing alternating current succeed was more important than personal wealth. The gesture was noble and selfless, but it was also devastating to Tesla's financial future. The fortune that should have supported his research for the rest of his life disappeared in a moment of generosity. Westinghouse recovered from his financial difficulties and went on to build an electrical empire based on Tesla's patents. The alternating current system spread rapidly across America and around the world, becoming the standard for electrical power generation and distribution. Tesla's vision had triumphed completely. His technology had revolutionized civilization, but the wealth that should have been his passed to others while he continued to struggle for funding. By the late 1890s, Tesla was becoming increasingly focused on wireless power transmission as the next great revolution in electrical technology. He had demonstrated the principle in his laboratory, transmitting energy without wires over short distances. Now he wanted to prove that the concept could work on a global scale, that power could be broadcast to any point on Earth using the planet itself as part of the transmission system. The theoretical basis for Tesla's wireless power system was complex and based on his understanding of electrical resonance and the conducting properties of the Earth. He proposed setting up standing waves of electrical energy that would resonate between the Earth's surface and the ionosphere, the upper atmosphere's conducting layer. Receiving stations anywhere on the planet could tap into these standing waves, extracting power from what Tesla called the ambient medium. Most electrical engineers who examined Tesla's proposals were skeptical. The physics of electromagnetic radiation suggested that for wireless power transmission over long distances would be impossibly inefficient. Energy would radiate away in all directions according to the inverse square law, meaning that only a tiny fraction could be captured by any receiving station. The losses would make the system completely impractical for anything except, perhaps, low-power communications. But Tesla insisted that his system would not operate by radiation into space, but by conduction through and around the Earth. He believed that the planet could be made to ring like a bell at specific frequencies, creating standing waves that would not diminish with distance in the way that radiated electromagnetic waves did. Whether this theory was correct remained to be proven through large-scale experimentation, and such experiments would require resources far beyond anything Tesla had available. The breakthrough came in 1900 when Tesla secured funding from J.P. Morgan, the most powerful financier in America. Morgan agreed to invest $150,000 in Tesla's wireless transmission project, a substantial sum that seemed sufficient to build the experimental facility Tesla had designed. The exact nature of what Morgan believed he was funding remains somewhat unclear. Tesla may have emphasized the wireless communications aspects of the project rather than power transmission, knowing that Morgan would be more interested in competing with Marconi's radio business. With Morgan's backing, Tesla purchased 200 acres of land on Long Island, New York, and began construction of the facility he named Wardenclyffe. The site was chosen partly for its proximity to New York City and partly for its geological characteristics, which Tesla believed would be favorable for his wireless transmission system. The centerpiece would be a tower 187 feet tall, topped with a massive copper dome, designed to broadcast electrical energy to the entire world. The tower's design was both functional and symbolic. The structure would house the oscillators and transformers needed to generate the millions of volts Tesla's theory required, while also serving as a visible monument to his vision of a wireless future. Stanford White, the famous architect, designed the tower to be both beautiful and impressive, a landmark that would announce to the world that a new age of electrical technology had arrived. Beneath the visible tower, Tesla's engineers excavated deep into the earth, creating tunnels and installing iron shafts that extended 120 feet down into the bedrock. These underground components were as important as the tower itself in Tesla's conception, for his theory required that the facility be firmly grounded in the Earth's conducting layers. The entire planet would become part of his transmission circuit, resonating with energy broadcast from Wardenclyffe and received anywhere by properly tuned equipment. Construction began in 1901, and Tesla worked with feverish intensity to bring his vision into physical reality. He spent long days at the Wardenclyffe site, supervising construction and making endless modifications to the plans as he refined his ideas. He would return to his rooms at the Waldorf Astoria late at night, only to work through the remaining hours on calculations and designs before catching a few hours of sleep and returning to Long Island. The strain of the project was taking a visible toll on Tesla's health and mental state. His already intense work habits became more extreme, with days when he seemed to barely sleep or eat. His peculiar personal rituals became more elaborate and time-consuming. Friends and associates noticed that he was becoming more isolated, more difficult to reach, more consumed by his vision of wireless power to the exclusion of everything else in life. More seriously, the money was running out faster than anticipated. The $150,000 from Morgan, which had seemed adequate when the project began, was proving insufficient for the ambitious facility Tesla had designed. The costs of construction, equipment, and experimentation were mounting rapidly, while the tower remained far from operational. Tesla needed more funding, and he needed it from the only source capable of providing it, J.P. Morgan himself. The relationship between Tesla and Morgan, never warm, was deteriorating as the project consumed money without producing results. Morgan was a businessman who expected returns on his investments, and Wardenclyffe was showing no signs of generating the commercial revenues he had anticipated. Worse, in December 1901, Guglielmo Marconi successfully transmitted wireless telegraph signals across the Atlantic Ocean, demonstrating that practical wireless communication was already being achieved by Tesla's competitor. Marconi's success fundamentally undermined the commercial rationale for Morgan's investment. If wireless communication was already being successfully developed by Marconi, what was the point of funding Tesla's more speculative and expensive system? When Tesla approached Morgan for additional funding, explaining that the original sum was insufficient to complete Wardenclyffe, Morgan's response was devastating. He refused to provide another dollar. Tesla was trapped in a nightmare scenario. He had spent Morgan's money and much of his own funds on a facility that was half-built and non-functional. He could not complete the project without additional capital, but no other investor would provide money for a project that J.P. Morgan had abandoned. The tower stood on Long Island like a monument to failed ambition, visible for miles around, but useless without the equipment and power needed to make it operational. For several years, Tesla struggled to find alternative funding or to somehow complete Wardenclyffe on reduced resources. He mortgaged his patents, borrowed money wherever he could, poured his own savings into the project. But the sums needed were simply too large, and the confidence of potential investors had been shattered by Morgan's withdrawal. By 1905, it was clear that Wardenclyffe would never be completed as Tesla had envisioned it. The failure of Wardenclyffe marked a turning point in Tesla's life and career. He was now 50 years old, his greatest achievements behind him, his financial resources exhausted, and his most ambitious vision unrealized. The man who had revolutionized electrical power with his polyphase system, who had harnessed Niagara Falls, who had lit the Chicago World's Fair, was now unable to complete the project that he believed would be his greatest contribution to humanity. The tower stood abandoned, a stark reminder of dreams that had exceeded the resources and understanding of their time. In 1917, during World War I, the structure was dynamited by the federal government, which feared it might be used by German spies as a landmark or communications facility. The destruction of Wardenclyffe Tower eliminated the last physical evidence of Tesla's most ambitious project, leaving only photographs and Tesla's own descriptions to preserve the memory of what he had attempted. Whether Tesla's wireless power transmission system could ever have worked remains a matter of debate among physicists and engineers. The consensus view is that his theory was fundamentally flawed, that the physics of electromagnetic radiation makes efficient long-distance wireless power transmission impossible. But some researchers continue to explore variations on Tesla's ideas, and certain aspects of his work at Wardenclyffe presaged later developments in radio and telecommunications technology. For Tesla himself, the failure was personal and profound. He had staked everything on Wardenclyffe, not just money, but his reputation and his vision of the future. The collapse of the project left him financially ruined and professionally diminished, no longer the celebrated genius who had conquered Edison, but an aging inventor whose latest ideas seemed more fantasy than engineering. The remainder of his life would be spent largely in obscurity, struggling to survive while the world moved forward, using technologies he had pioneered but could no longer develop. The years following Wardenclyffe's failure were marked by a slow retreat from the center of technological innovation to its periphery. Tesla continued to live at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel through 1915, maintaining the appearance of success even as his financial situation deteriorated. He worked on various inventions and consulted for companies that sought his expertise, but the major breakthrough that might have restored his fortunes and reputation never came. His living situation became increasingly precarious as unpaid hotel bills mounted. Finally, in 1915, the Waldorf Astoria management informed him that he could no longer remain without payment. To settle part of his debt, Tesla transferred ownership of the Wardenclyffe property to the hotel, a transaction that formalized the end of his dreams for wireless power transmission. He moved to cheaper accommodations, beginning a pattern of moving from hotel to hotel when bills came due, always managing to maintain dignity even as circumstances grew more desperate. Tesla's appearance during this period was that of a gentleman who had fallen on hard times. He dressed impeccably in formal black suits that became increasingly worn as the years passed. He maintained his elaborate personal rituals and his solitary habits, taking meals alone, feeding pigeons in Bryant Park, walking the streets of Manhattan late at night when crowds were gone. To those who recognized him, he remained courteous and dignified, but there was a sadness in his eyes that spoke of dreams unfulfilled. Financially, Tesla survived through a combination of small consulting fees, occasional lectures, and what he called consulting arrangements with companies that were actually charitable support disguised as business relationships. Westinghouse Electric provided him with a modest monthly stipend, ostensibly for consulting, but actually in recognition of what he had contributed to their success. Other companies did the same, allowing Tesla to maintain a semblance of independence while actually supporting him as one supports an elderly relative. His only consistent source of joy during these years came from his relationship with the pigeons he fed daily in the parks near his hotels. Tesla had always felt a connection to animals, finding in them the uncomplicated acceptance he could not find in human relationships. but his feeling for the pigeons, and particularly for one white pigeon with grey tips on its wings, went beyond simple affection. He spoke of this bird as if she were human, claimed that she visited him at his hotel window, that they had a special connection that transcended the normal relationship between man and animal. In interviews during his later years, Tesla would describe this white pigeon with an intensity that alarmed his listeners. He claimed that she was the love of his life, that he loved her as a man loves a woman, that she loved him in return. One night, he said, she came to his window, and he knew instantly that she was dying. As he held her, he saw a brilliant light emanating from her eyes, brighter than the arc lamps he had worked with in his laboratory. When the light faded, she was dead, and Tesla claimed that something in him died with her. Whether this story reflected reality or had become distorted by Tesla's increasingly unstable mental state, it revealed the depth of his isolation and loneliness. The man who had once been courted by society's elite, who had counted Mark Twain among his friends and had dinner with the likes of J.P. Morgan, was now a solitary figure whose closest relationship was with a pigeon. Despite his declining circumstances, Tesla continued to announce new inventions and discoveries, though he rarely had the resources to develop them beyond the conceptual stage. He claimed to have designed a revolutionary turbine that would be more efficient than any existing engine. He spoke of a death ray that could destroy enemy aircraft from hundreds of miles away, though he called it a peace ray because its existence would make war impossible. He described methods for wireless transmission of images that presaged television. He proposed systems for detecting submarines and for transmitting power through the earth for propelling vehicles. Some of these ideas contained genuine insights, foreshadowing technologies that would later be developed. Others were the fantasies of a brilliant mind, no longer constrained by practical considerations or connected to current scientific understanding. Tesla's contemporaries found it increasingly difficult to distinguish between his legitimate innovations and his delusions, a problem that damaged his credibility and made it harder to secure support for even his sound ideas. In 1917, Tesla was awarded the Edison Medal by the American Institute of Electrical Engineers, the organization's highest honor. The award was a recognition of his fundamental contributions to electrical engineering, particularly the polyphase alternating current system. Tesla initially refused to accept the award, still bitter about his treatment by Edison decades earlier, but friends eventually convinced him to attend the ceremony. His acceptance speech was gracious, but tinged with sadness, acknowledging what he had achieved while also hinting at what might have been if he had received better support and understanding. The 1920s brought Tesla occasional moments of public attention, usually on his birthday, when newspapers would interview him about his life and work. These interviews showed a man who was simultaneously proud of his achievements and frustrated by the lack of recognition and support for his later ideas. He would describe in detail the inventions he claimed to have perfected mentally, from wireless power transmission to revolutionary propulsion systems, all waiting for the funding and facilities needed to bring them into physical reality. But the scientific and engineering communities were increasingly skeptical of Tesla's claims. Too many announced inventions had never materialized. Too many theoretical breakthroughs had never been published in rigorous technical form. Tesla's refusal or inability to provide detailed documentation or working prototypes made it impossible to evaluate his later ideas seriously. The inventor, who had once amazed the world with practical demonstrations, had become a figure who announced wonders, but could not or would not prove they existed beyond his imagination. Tesla's living conditions continued to deteriorate through the 1920s and 1930s. He moved from hotel to hotel, always one step ahead of unpaid bills, each new residence slightly less expensive and less prestigious than the last. His meals became simpler, his clothing more worn, his isolation more complete. Friends who tried to help him often found their assistance rejected or accepted only under pretenses that preserved his dignity. He would not accept charity, but would accept payment for consulting that never actually occurred. Yet even in decline, Tesla maintained his personal discipline and his intellectual activity. He rose each morning at the same hour, performed the same rituals, took the same walks at the same times. He continued to think about electrical problems, to visualize inventions, to believe that one more breakthrough might restore him to his former prominence. The capacity for detailed mental visualization that had served him so well in his youth remained sharp, allowing him to design and test complex machines entirely in his imagination. In 1931, on Tesla's 75th birthday, Time magazine put his image on the cover, celebrating him as one of the great inventors of the electrical age. The article acknowledged both his genuine achievements and his later eccentricities, painting a portrait of a man who had changed the world but had somehow been left behind by the changes he had set in motion. The recognition was gratifying, but also poignant, highlighting how far Tesla had fallen from the heights he had once occupied. The final years of Tesla's life were spent at the New Yorker Hotel, in a modest room on the 33rd floor that he occupied rent-free through an arrangement made by Westinghouse Electric. The company continued to provide him with a small monthly stipend, though he was no longer doing any actual work for them. It was a gesture of respect and gratitude for what he had contributed to their success, support disguised as business relationship to preserve his dignity. Tesla's health was failing, though he refused to acknowledge it or to see doctors. He had always believed that his body, like his mind, could be controlled through discipline and will. He maintained his daily routines even when physical weakness made them difficult, refusing to admit that age and poverty were taking their toll. Friends who visited found him thin and frail, but still talking enthusiastically about his inventions and his theories about the fundamental nature of the universe. On January 7, 1943, a maid at the New Yorker Hotel discovered that Tesla had placed a "Do Not Disturb" sign on his door and had not been seen for several days. When the door was finally opened, Tesla was found dead in his bed, alone as he had lived for so many decades. He was 86 years old. The official cause of death was coronary thrombosis, but really he had died of old age, poverty, and the accumulated disappointments of a life that had achieved so much.